Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today with Reveneer, Seller Psychology, How to Create Relevant Sales Conversations That Convert. Today's buyers are busier than ever, and their attention span is shrinking. In fact, Microsoft found from a recent study that humans have the attention span of a goldfish. Yes, a goldfish, which is a mere 8 seconds. And since 8 seconds is very short-lived, sellers only have a fraction of time to stir up that curiosity in their prospects. But if you use personalized and relevant prospecting techniques, sellers, you can cut through that noise and get to the heart of what your buyers actually care about. But too often, sellers of every caliber aren't sure, how to use those techniques effectively. So Jerry, Zach, they're going to be talking about how you can create relevant sales conversations, stand out in that prospecting crowd, as well as stay top of mind after those conversations with your market. All right, with that, I wanted to introduce Jerry and Zach today. Thanks so much for joining us. Jerry, did you want to share like a quick fun fact about yourself and where you're at in your sales career?
For sure. Thank you, Becca. So I'm Jerry Castelletto, work at Reveneer, where we design, build, and manage dedicated outbound sales teams. I started my sales career here about six and a half years ago. Started as an SDR day one, and a lot of internal growth, and now get to manage sales teams for a lot of our clients. We work with everybody from stealth startups to big enterprises, so really get to see a lot of different ways to get meetings at the top of funnel and see them convert through the bottom. So very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Oh, Becca, I think we might have lost audio, but if I'm reading your lips correctly, I think you were just introing me, so I can take it. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here with Jerry and with quite a large audience here. Really encouraged to see that. So my name is Zach Thompson. I'm a director of sales development at ZoomInfo. I oversee specifically our customer outbound motion. So my teams are responsible for working with our existing customer base, bringing new products to you, identifying additional areas within your companies where we can partner and add value. So it's about 130 or so SDRs that I oversee. I also started, like Jerry, day one as an SDR. That was just a little over 5 years ago, and here we are today. So learned a lot, have a lot to learn, and in the market that's ever changing. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about and excited to dive in here. Becca, I think you might be on mute again. Hopefully it's not just on my end and everybody's like, what the heck is this guy talking about?
Good. My coffee hasn't kicked in today. Thank you. Thank you, Zach. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Thanks for introducing yourselves. When we were doing this prep call, Jerry, I think you touched on that there's some misconceptions about using personalization and relevance out there in the sales world. So one that I hear often is doing these strategies is great. They're effective, but they're very time consuming or more time consuming, could decrease the productivity of the sales rep and sales teams. But I wanted to hear your take on those misconceptions.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you can see on any social platform talking about sales is a lot of people are like relevance, personalization. That's the only way to convert, anybody or break through the noise, which yes, it's true, but spending, 20, 30 minutes to have the perfectly crafted email where you don't even know if you're going to get an open or not is not the best use of time. So it's figuring out a good process, repeatable process of having personalization and relevance, but not spending, X amount of time on it. I always like to say, if it's going to take more than 5 minutes, it's going to take too much time. And, getting the average industry open rates, 25, 30%, you're going to have a 1 in 3 chance of even them seeing that email. So spend no more than 5 minutes on getting that personalization or relevance, because you do want to stick out from the crowd. They're getting, tens if not hundreds a week of prospecting emails to the people that you're trying to reach out to and build a relationship with. So you still want to separate yourself from that noise, and we'll show some, different techniques to get there, but don't spend 20, 30 minutes. Set a timer, 5 minutes, have a good, framework of how you're going to approach that email and the message and where you're going to be grabbing the relevance, plug it in and send it out and move on to the next person.
Yeah, that's a great rule of thumb. Yeah, to just monitor the time. Really like that and how you kind of broke it down for us. Really quick, an attendee just asked, was an SDR? SDR is sales development rep. They kind of had different functions depending on what business you're at. Zach, Jerry, feel free to chime in on anything additional there, but that's how I've understood them. So
for sure. Yeah. SDR is one thing that they're called. We often refer to them as XDRs, as different companies will call them account development representatives, ADRs, market development, lead development, business development. So BDR and SDR are probably the two most common terms that we hear, but essentially in most cases, at least that I've experienced, it's a largely top of funnel role responsible for driving conversations and meetings for sales reps. Some people might even think of it as inside sales versus outside sales, although there are some things about inside and outside sales that don't really apply. But it's that kind of a model where you have a supporting seller, or you have two sellers working together, one kind of working at one end of the funnel, one end working at the other end of the funnel.
Awesome. Yeah, and just bringing it back right to sort of what Jerry was talking about with the misconceptions, Zach, did you have any others that you've sort of seen or heard or experienced personally in your role as a salesperson and leader?
Totally. One thing that I hear a lot, like Jerry said, is that you have to be super personalized and super relevant in order to get through to people. And I think it's important to be personalized and to have relevant messaging when you have a conversation. But the way that I think about managing my teams is I want them to have conversations. I want them to get in front of our prospective buyers. And there's a lot of things that can happen in that discovery phase where we definitely have an opportunity to drive better conversations there if we are very personalized and if we have something relevant to share. That's going to sort of unlock that gate to larger discovery for us. But we focus more on getting to that point of doing the discovery and understanding how we can truly help and partner with our customers. So similar to what Jerry said, but also different at the same time, we really think about, especially when it comes to productivity, outputs versus outcomes. And so ultimately what we're trying to drive is the right outcomes. So it's really not about outputs. And, I would challenge the audience here and anybody who's thinking about productivity of their sales teams, like take a long, hard look at how you measure that. It really should be a mix of both quantity and quality or quantitative and qualitative measurements or benchmarks, because you want to make sure that you're not just spraying and praying. I think everybody here knows that that's not going to work. But there's absolutely still room for a high velocity, high volume model that involves personalization and relevance. And we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but I think one of the key areas or key tools that helps you do that is having the right data on your personas that you're selling to, the companies that you're selling to, and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. To me, it sounds like both you and Jerry are like, don't go too crazy with it. Like, do it within what works for your team's productivity. So I love that. And thanks for giving us some good ways of measuring sales productivity as well. That was a great touch, Zach. And just over time, how have you both seen these concepts evolve? Like, sort of where did personalization get its start when you guys were using it, and where do you see it now? What are your thoughts on that? Jerry, did you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when I started on the phones, personalization, I'd say wasn't the biggest topic. We're a phone first shop. We like to get people on the phone and have that actual conversation. And, we'll do omni-channel after that and do email and LinkedIn outreach from there. And you get someone on the phone, one, connect rates were higher back then, especially before the pandemic. And two, a lot of people were more open to have conversations then. Relevance could have even been a title. It could have been like, hey, I saw you're responsible for the sales team over there, where now that's what everybody says. So now the more distinct and granular you can be in those first few seconds in a phone call, we've seen you have to be much more specific, where it could be, hey, you raised a funding round, or you have a new position, or I saw you're hiring this, or saw we're alumni together, something much more specific than just a title. So I've seen that pivot in the past, 4 or 5 years. And then especially from the pandemic, using omni-channel and not just the phone, but using that relevance and personalization in your outbound messaging for email, having it at the top in the subject line or in the preview, because it's got to catch them early. So, it's gone a lot deeper than just, using a title. You got to stand out. You got to break through the noise. You're going to have a few seconds on the phone, and you're going to want to use the other channels as well. So it's really just, that's why you do have to spend a few minutes where you could have just looked through down your cadence and kind of after it.
Awesome. Yeah, Zach, anything to add to that from your perspective?
I would echo what Jerry said. I think the only thing I might add there is think about that too in the context of your larger go-to-market motion. So whether you're a small shop and it's really like sales is wearing a lot of different hats, or maybe you do have a really large and robust marketing team like we're very fortunate to have at ZoomInfo, you want to think about these things not just in the context of sales messaging, but how is sales relaying the same concepts, and like what does the bridge look like between sales and marketing, where marketing is doing some of that air cover, some of the content, for example, content syndication or advertising, right? Are we hitting our prospects with ads? And so there's a content component to that, as well as like a presentation component to it. So all of those areas are things that you want to think about when you're thinking about personalization and relevance. It's not just in the SDR role, but think about all the auxiliary functions that exist to make that SDR team or BDR team that much more efficient. And if you don't have those, again, like your SDRs or BDRs are probably wearing more hats than maybe some others are, but they should still be thinking about that, not just in their email messaging and their talk tracks, but even in how they're presenting notes to their account executive as they're passing a meeting off, or to their account manager. There's a lot of places where that can show up.
Great. Awesome. Lots of great tactical advice already. I love it. So now that we kind of understand personalization relevance, Zach, how do you define relevance and how do you find personalization? We kind of want to know, the differences and why that matters in how salespeople approach their conversations.
Totally. So this is one where I'm pretty passionate about this topic. You hear a lot about personalization, meaning you need to find like facts about who a person is, or what their favorite movie is, what sports teams they root for, where their kids go to school. Like I've seen this taken to crazy extremes, and it's really, in the B2B world, it's really not about that. It's really, personalization is based on the persona and like specific problems that we know that persona is responsible for solving in their business, or likely has based on market conditions. That's very similar to relevance, but relevance has a component of like timing, circumstances. There's more company factors, right? So what's relevant to one director of marketing that's also personalized to that director of marketing could also be personalized to another director of marketing, but not relevant to that director of marketing, because they work in different companies. There's different things going on, different priorities. So relevance is sort of the larger, zoom out a little bit, what matters right now in context. And personalization is sort of more what matters to this persona generally across the board. And that's kind of counterintuitive to think about, because again, people typically think of personalization as these are things that are unique to this one individual. And in the B2B world, there is value sometimes in adding a touch in your outreach around something that you just connect on a human level, whether it's pop culture, sports, something maybe you went to the same school and you're alumni of the same university, something like that. Like, there's absolutely value in that, and I've seen places where that extra little kind of sprinkle of really a personal touch outside of like a problem solving message can be really helpful. But at the end of the day, like the substance, the foundation really is, it's the relevance and the problem solving piece. It's not, hey, we went to the same school, so you should take a look at my solution. Or, hey, like I saw you like this sports team. Here's a fun fact about them. You should take a look at my solution.
Yeah, I like how you touched on that, because that definitely has been a tactic that I've seen, or like a salesperson has approached me with my alma mater from college, and it got my attention, but it didn't necessarily progress the conversation. So I think it's always important to also not just assume, oh, they graduated from this entity, so they're going to have a really personal, emotional connection to it. Not saying I didn't love my experience getting my bachelor's, but it wasn't as an important, relevant factor for me personally. So I'm really happy you touched on that. Jerry, did you have any examples sort of to add on to what Zach was talking about in terms of, what is personalization versus relevance?
Yeah, I mean, definitely echo what Zach said. Personalization is that persona specific. Something like a college is a good door opener. Like you might get a connection request on LinkedIn, instead of them just seeing a salesperson, they'll see a reason to accept your connect, but that's not going to get them a seat at the table. And that's where relevance can really step in, tying in a reason to have that conversation. And that's where you have to do some research. You do have to dig into some platforms and have potentially some data or, a good reason to have that conversation. But, definitely agree on the persona based, look at who they are, what they're responsible for, and then tie your relevance right into that, just because it's going to be different person to person. And with that, you can scale that up. Once you know how you're going to structure that, how you're going to get your replies, or how to use it over the phone, you can use it at scale. But definitely agree with, I see a lot of stuff online about using, someone's favorite sports team. It's like, yeah, it's cool. Like get on the discovery call, talk about that for a minute, break the ice, but then use your relevance to really tie in the business problem and, see if there's any pain you can help solve.
Great. And as we're touching on personalization and relevance, they're effective, but how can sellers use those two together? And do you guys have any examples that personally you've used in the past where it ties in both and it's worked really well in your favor?
I mean, for myself, and just a little glimpse of like Reveneer's background. I mean, we have 200 SDRs here right outside of Boston, and we have, 70, 80 clients that they work for. So we get to see a lot of different tactics be used across different industries to see what works. And some of that personalization works great in some industries and some it doesn't. Something I've seen personalization and relevance work really well is in the sales and marketing field. If you're targeting those, that's sales and marketing, especially sales, talking's really, strong suit for them. So if you can break the ice with any type of personalization and tie in relevance, you're going to get to an answer, whether you have a table, pretty quickly. A good portion of our floor does reach out to IT professionals, and that's where it's a little bit different. They keep a lot more close to the chest, especially in IT security. You gotta, there's a fine line in personalization with that type. You almost want to go right to relevance and not be overly specific if you see something that you could bring up, just because you're reaching out of nowhere. You're talking about a security system, something that's protecting data, and you might want to be wary of that. So from what I've seen great examples of them using maybe like an alumni or a persona specific problem with sales or pipeline generation, having that opening the door and tying in relevance to a sales or marketing persona. But on the IT side, just because we get that glimpse as well, it's definitely a different field, and you want to be more relevance, just straight to business.
Great. Yeah, Zach, anything to add to that? Any fun stories or anecdotes?
Yeah, there's a story that's pretty famous at ZoomInfo. We had an SDR who worked in our strategic segment who was targeting a large telecommunications company and was trying to get a high-level executive there on a meeting, and was using very relevant messaging, and got to a point where it was like, we've got to pull out the big guns here, so to speak. So he actually went and found that this executive was really, really into like hot air balloons. And I don't remember all the details of how they discovered that, but he ended up getting custom made like a 4-foot tall model of a hot air balloon and sending that to the prospect just as a way of demonstrating again, like, hey, I've been sending you relevant messaging around opportunities for us to partner, pains that you might be trying to solve, or opportunities that you might have in the business. But I also want to demonstrate too, I understand who you are, and like that matters in this conversation. So I thought that was a really cool example, and it did end up netting us a meeting, which led to a significant opportunity for our company. So I think that's one example that's always really cool to go back to see, like, leading with relevance, trying to get the attention that way with the appropriate level of personalization on the persona side, but then, quite literally going to that personal outside of the persona piece, what's unique to that person as something to kind of get it across the finish line.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Was that, did that SDR do that remotely? Because we're all in that COVID world.
Yeah, this was actually probably 2019 or maybe early 2020 when this happened. So I think it was before the COVID world, but I've also heard similar stories in the remote world where, we're not sending things to people's houses necessarily, but, sending it to an office location. And, there are definitely still ways for direct mail sends and sending gifts, like that tactic in particular, definitely ways to make that work still.
Nice. Yeah, Jerry, any fun stories on your end that you'd like to share?
I did have one, and it was pretty recently. One of our reps was doing, their outbound outreach. They got a prospect on the phone, ended up talking about fishing, and they got on that topic somehow throughout the conversation. The conversations can go all over the place. And then they ended up talking about, sales memes, and then he ended up, hey, here's my product, let me send you some information. And he sent him a link, in the sense he knew the prospect was into memes or sales memes. He did have a link in there, and he was like, hey, gift card for your time, but it was to the Rickroll video. And the guy replied, and he was like, this is really funny, I know that link, like, I'll take a look at your product. And it did convert into an opportunity, which is funny. So it's very outside the box, but the conversations can go anywhere. So if you have those little tidbits, like he knew he liked fishing, he knew he liked memes, he threw it in the follow-up email as like a PS, here's a link, and it definitely caught his attention, and it converted to a meeting and opportunity, which is at the end of the day what we wanted to see.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think both of your anecdotes sort of portray and show what they can do from that initial conversation and like taking it into the next one or the next point of contact with the prospects. So that was really cool that those worked out. You guys already sort of walked through this in terms of personalization, relevance, sort of what to avoid. Is there any common mistakes you see sales reps making when they use these tactics?
Yeah, so actually I saw somebody ask a question in the Q&A. We might get to it a little more in depth later, but I think it hits on a mistake that we see. And I'm trying to find the exact question. It was something to the effect of, have you ever seen personalization be taken too far? And the answer to that is like unequivocally, absolutely yes. In a lot of cases, we get into the research mode. Like going back to that balloon example, that's a fairly risky piece of outreach. Like that needs to be something that's well thought through and well coordinated. That's not something that you want to just have in your regular repertoire of tricks. Because when you are getting to personal information, right, people are automatically going to be defensive. Especially if they're not familiar with you and they don't know you. So you got to think about a couple of things. You have to think about where in your outreach cycle you're using this. Don't use it in the very first touch. Like don't go super personal there. That's just asking for that wall to go up immediately, right? Somebody calls my cell phone and says something very personal about me. I'm immediately like, who are you? How did you find this out? Like I'm automatically in defense mode. And like for that seller, I am now a much more difficult prospect to work with. So like you're not doing yourself any favors if you're startling people. So what I always teach my reps is like lead with relevance, like establish the conversation on business terms, because again, we're in the business to business space. We're humans who work for businesses, but we're in the business to business space. So we need to establish the foundation on that level before we get to, something where personalization is going to be kind of that extra piece to take that conversation further. So that's probably the number one most common mistake, is people just like showing all their cards right out of the gate.
Great. Anything else, Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with it. It could definitely scare people off. And I had a prospect email me once and reference like MMA fights that weekend and who I was rooting for. And I just replied, how do you know I'm into this sport? And they checked my social media and they saw I've posted on there before. So I was like very defensive when I saw that in a business to business email, because it's like, I've never talked to you. How would you have known that? So you definitely want to toe the line, especially if you don't have a relationship with somebody. You can use, relevance is the safest bet. Tie it to a pain point. If you see something great on their LinkedIn that can tie in your product, go with that first. Discovery is another great point where you can be more personalized when you're actually having that and building that relationship with somebody. So definitely don't want to go over that barrier too early, because you'll burn the bridge with that person for the indefinite future.
Nice. Awesome. So I think we have a good idea of personalization relevance, how it's worked for you. Thank you for sharing those anecdotes, by the way. Those were really fun to listen to. The audience seemed to be really intrigued too. So let's go ahead and dive in now to how and when to use personalization relevance across the sales cycle. We've sort of touched on it, but going a bit deeper, Zach, I think you talked about a little previously, but how would sellers even get started with using these tactics in their sales approaches? Zach, did you want to kick that off?
For sure. So I think the first thing to think about as you're evaluating how to use personalization is, and I said this before, think about what you want your outputs and outcomes to be, and prioritize outcomes over outputs. So I see a lot of sales development leaders that will put goals out in front of their team, like, hey, you need to send 20 personalized emails today. I think that's a not very good piece of direction for teams. I think there has to be a little bit more of an outcome basis there. What are we actually trying to drive with those 20 personalized emails? And again, just understand that what's guaranteed is that you are going to spend X number of minutes crafting that email. What you have no control over, very little control over, is does that email even hit the prospect's inbox? And then from there, do they open it? And then from there, do they read it? And from there, do they interact with it? And from there, do they reply to it? There's 5 steps there where we might lose that. And so it's a very low conversion rate. So we have to balance the level of output with the outcomes that we want. So my philosophy here is kind of like make your big bets. Find those accounts you really, really want to get into, the highest value targets and the highest value persona targets within those accounts, and set yourself some boundaries on how much research you're going to do and what types of things you're going to be looking for to craft messages. But don't just go out there on a quest to send super personalized messages to every single person. It's a fast way to burn out, because again, a lot of those messages, despite our best intentions, are never going to make it to that prospect. Or even if they do, the prospect isn't going to read it because it's one of 100 different emails they got that day that are external emails, and they also have 75 emails from internal sources that they need to reply to, and all the other responsibilities that they have. And that becomes more and more true the higher up the sort of hierarchy you go, both in terms of like executive level and depending on the type of company that you're selling to as well. So yeah, in short, measure what you want the outcome to be, and then let the inputs dictate what that outcome will be, rather than trying to say, here's what our output is going to be, and hoping that drives the right outcome.
Nice. Yeah, and you kind of like touched on like the importance of I lost my thought. Um, well, what were you were touching on sort of starting with the right inputs. Jerry, what are like the data points that would be the right inputs for the right prospect that you're after?
For sure. And using data to get to a repeatable state is something I'm very in tune to. Just because if you're just sending one off emails and having no data to back it up, you're never going to know if that is the most optimal way to structure your outreach or even your talk track on the phone or anything there. So, I mean, just to start with emails, you want to look at, open rates, click rates if you have anything in there that's a link, reply rates, bounce rates is important. You want to make sure that it's getting to the proper email address and you're having quality data. But A/B test, structure a few different emails and look, is this subject line getting a really high open rate, but it's not getting a reply rate. It's like your first thing, you have to look at the subject line, because if you have the best email but it's not getting opened, it doesn't matter. So figure out your baseline and, like Zach said, have some type of goal. I want to get to 30%. I want to get to 35% just because of what I'm seeing. And, craft your subject line to get to that. And then now look at the body of your email. Length is something I see that is very important. You got to keep it short and sweet. People aren't reading long, cold emails. Trust me, none of us do. So keep it short and sweet, but A/B tests, your relevance at the top or the bottom, or personalization or your CTA, and see where you're getting to that 1, 2, 3% reply rate and so on. So for your data, you need some type of data tool to look at your open click reply rates and A/B testing, because especially when I started, a lot of the time I would see reps, just do one cadence, one email, and like these are our rates. It's like we have the functionality now to test those out and get to a repeatable state. Once you have the repeatable state, now you know how to go after those high profile targets and accounts confidently.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I'm a marketer, not a salesperson, but as a marketer, testing, you just never know, right? So it's interesting to hear that it's sort of, the flip side in the sales world as well. You just never know what's going to work. So definitely testing where to place things in that email and what to put in that subject line. Great tips there.
I might add to that too. Like, think about the accounts that you're targeting and using data as a way to determine where you are spending your time and deploying your resources. So for the sales reps on the call, if you have a territory or a known group of accounts, like, look at those accounts, use tools out there that show you when they're on your website or what topics they're researching, what initiatives they have going on at that company. Obviously, I work for ZoomInfo, so here I am to talk about ZoomInfo does all of those things. But point being, kind of at a higher level, use tools and use resources that are at your disposal to help you understand, again, the sort of context of the companies in your addressable market, whether you're a rep and you have a territory or whether you're a sales leader and you're trying to figure out how to deploy your sales team. Like, if you're on a mission to catch fish, you need to be somewhere where there's a body of water, because that's where the fish are. So you use a map to determine where the bodies of water are and you figure out where you're going to go fish. Prospecting is the same type of thing. You need to have that map to understand where you can actually go impact your addressable market. And then on top of that, know where the fish are most likely to bite, right? And that's where things like intent data and understanding who's on your website and how many times they've been on your website, and then understanding what initiatives does that company have going on right now? Did they just get a round of funding? Did they just lay a whole bunch of people off? Are they on a hiring spree? Are they about to open a new location? All of those things, depending on what service or what product you sell, all of those things could lead to relevance in your messaging. And if you leave them out, you're just missing the opportunity to be relevant. And someone else in the market is going to use that data and going to have that relevance in their messaging.
Yeah, it's all about the timing, right? Who gets in front of there first with that piece of information, for sure. We've sort of touched on, when to use personalization, but what part of the sales process, Jerry, I think we touched on it in our prep call, do you see relevance and personalization having the largest impact?
So for the initial outreach, yeah, relevance is great, and that can get their attention. But in discovery, when you can really talk about their business, and understand what they do, and you did your research, that's what can really separate yourself from other reps. During the sales process, you do want to use relevance and, what impact or pain points you're resolving for that customer throughout the sales process. You don't just want to sell your product on value and just keep going into that. Tie it into how you're going to help that company. And discovery is a great portion. Go and understand what the company does. It's like you'd be surprised how often, I'll get a call and I'll be like, what does Reveneer do? And they can't tell me. And it's like, just do that basic research of just understanding the company. Who's at that company. Like Zach said, you named off a bunch of things. Understand that before you go into discovery, because you can tie your product into that relevance. It's like, hey, I saw you launch this new product last week. That's great. Are you scaling this because of that? And it's like, other sales reps don't do that as often as you think. So in discovery and that first call, because you're going to have that 30 minutes, and that's really what's going to make or break your next step in the sales process. And if you even get there, so using relevance, do your research, have the proper amount of prep time, bring that to the call, and you'll feel confident, and the prospect will see that you do care about the problems that you could resolve for them.
Yeah, I like how you touched on that, because that personally has happened to me in a discovery call where they're asking me questions that I sort of think in my head, well, I feel like you would have already known that type deal. And it's just coming from a place of, let's make this call more productive for the both of us. So definitely have had some personal experience there. Anything to add to that, Zach?
Yeah, I think just like what you just said right there, it's kind of like, hey, if you're calling me to sell me something, you should be trying to help me solve a problem. You should be an advocate. You should be a consultant. I shouldn't be doing you a favor. So if you're asking me questions that are easily answered by information that's on our website, or a simple Google search, or something like that, like, you are communicating to me as a potential buyer that this is about you and not about me. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you think about relevance and personalization too, is ultimately your outreach as a salesperson, again, in this B2B world, you are trying to help your buyers solve problems with your product or with your services. That is the number one thing you are trying to do. And so if you're messaging, if you are communicating, even in the questions that you're asking, that you haven't done that sort of basic homework, and that you don't have a baseline level of knowledge about what I do, and at least somewhat of an educated guess about what my biggest problems are right now, I'm now helping you understand my world, which that's not how the transaction's supposed to work. So I think about that a lot with my reps as well. Like, I don't expect you to know everything about every single person you call. That's impossible. But I do want you to be able to have enough and to speak to those things with conviction, so that prospects on the other end of the phone believe that you genuinely are there to help them. That doesn't mean you have to know everything. You're still allowed to ask questions, and you absolutely should be asking questions to get below the surface and to understand more. But you have to demonstrate sort of a baseline of proficiency to earn the right to ask those questions in a way that's productive.
For sure. Awesome. Well, we're coming kind of close to time, so I'm going to move things along here. For the sales leaders that are in the audience today, in your guys' experience, have you run any exercises with your SDRs, your sales teams, that kind of help them enact these tactics, or give them coaching, guidance, that kind of thing? Any tips you could give for the sales leaders today?
Definitely, at least on my end. So we use conversation intelligence, obviously, again, from ZoomInfo. So shameless plug for Chorus here. But that's something we use a lot, both to listen to and review calls, and kind of understand, how are we going into calls? Are we demonstrating that we have some expertise in the domain that we're trying to talk to? Looking at transcripts, reviewing emails, obviously going through, like with my managers, we look at data on email on a weekly basis. What are our deliverability rates? What are our open rates, click-through rates? Jerry talked about a lot of that stuff. So yeah, those are all very regular habits and routines that we are in, to constantly understand, like, are we landing? Are we doing the right things to educate our SDRs in what they need to know to be able to go speak to our prospects and our customers intelligently? Do we need to make tweaks? And then, we have great partners in sales enablement who we can take that information to and say, hey, we're seeing a gap here. Like, we are consistently getting stuck in this phase of our calls, or this part of our messaging isn't landing. Same conversation we go and we have with our partners in marketing. Hey, our copy needs to be adjusted here, because here's what we're seeing this piece, be contentious or what have you. So if you're a sales leader on the call, like, you want to be training your reps on, what personalization and relevance are and how to use them. And again, like, that goes back to decide what your outcomes are and your goals are, and coach to those things. So there's a lot of value in sitting down one-to-one with a rep and going through emails they've written, or sequences that they're using, or calls that you can listen to. But, like, look at the macro trends too, particularly the larger of a team you have, because then you can start to move the needle across a lot of people rather than just one by one.
Thanks. Jerry, any additional thoughts on sort of how you approach those types of scenarios with your teams?
For sure. And very similar to Zach, diving into, what's our end goal, and building up to that. Definitely echo what Zach said. Something to add on to it is, as a sales leader, talk about what's not converting, because those conversations are great. You already have the relevance, and you can coach your reps to go back and follow up with them. So it's like, as a sales leader, what's top of funnel, what's moving through, but what's not converting are, conversations that didn't go to meeting. So it's like, I'll pop those up, and in our internal meetings, let's talk about how we can potentially get these to convert. Because in those few minutes, there's a lot of relevance that you can bring back to follow up. So that's something that I think goes, a little bit under the radar, but is a great skill that I see. It's talk to your reps about that next week. It's like, hey, we were following up with these accounts. We had great relevance. Get anybody on the phone. What was your email? Send it to me. Happy to take a look at it. It's like, that's that collaboration you want. So never forget follow up, because those people you already have a little bit of relationship and relevance to, and that next call is going to be even stronger.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely building off of the prior what worked going forward, for sure. You kind of touched on this, Jerry, with, making sure your copy's shorter, and Zach added some thoughts as well for email outbound prospecting. But, whether it's LinkedIn or email or call conversations, how should sellers and sales teams sort of approach those channels differently in relation to personalization and relevance?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And, they're very different channels. And, I think I stated earlier, but we're a phone first shop. So we love getting on the phone. We love to have that conversation, because an email, the prospect builds their own objections that you can't overcome. So that's why we like to make calls. And we do aggregate our data in just a small sample size to use data. It's like conversation rate. We want the conversation to be 2 to 5 minutes. Anything past 5 minutes, we see conversion to discovery call go low. You're almost giving too much information and going too much into the conversation. So it's like, that's one data point on the phone, where if you're seeing, you're not converting to meetings, but the conversation rates are off the roof, they might be giving too much intel or too much information. So there's always a time to close. But when to look at messaging, it's like having a good, clean dashboard. For all of our customers, we have calls connect rate, which is anytime a prospect picks up the phone, conversation rate, anything over 2 minutes, scheduled rate, delivered rate. And those can really see if your messaging over the phone with relevance is working. It's like, are you seeing, are you not getting your connect to conversation rate high enough? Let's go back. What are we using for relevance? Where are we getting it? Are we using title, or are we using, real facts based on the research we did? So have a good, clean data dashboard for your phone outreach, because, just using hearsay is not going to get you to that outcome faster. For the email channel, I said short is great. You want to keep it, pretty quick, 100, 125 words, relevance, a clean CTA, and a follow-up in a few days. That bumps the email. I see great results with that. So it's like, you want to be pretty light on the email. You can feed more information lower in the cadence, I see success with. But in the beginning, you don't just want to value dump. You want to scale it. put in a plug for the relevance, and move on to the next person. And then LinkedIn is pretty interesting. It's more of a long game that we see success with, engage with their content. If they post something, read the article. Hey, this was really insightful. You can share a piece of content you have potentially. That is more of a long game. You don't want to connect and spam. You could get blocked off LinkedIn pretty quickly, and you're going to lose a lot of credibility with that person if you got them on the phone. So definitely be wary on the LinkedIn, because a lot of people will just connect, message, I want a meeting. That's going to burn a lot of bridges pretty quickly.
Yeah. Zach, anything to pepper in there?
Yeah, I totally agree on the LinkedIn piece. Like, use LinkedIn very sparingly and very strategically. So like, if you've got a home run prospect and you have a reason to believe your emails are not getting to that person, that's an area where I would say, hey, let's try LinkedIn. And again, understanding like we might get blocked. That person might not want to have a conversation with us. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe the emails are getting to them and they're just deleting them. But like, use LinkedIn as a tool kind of on top of the other channels, not as a primary channel, unless your prospect is highly active on LinkedIn, in which case it just makes sense, right? Back to the fishing analogy earlier, go where the fish are. And if you know that person's very active on LinkedIn, why would we try to reach them via email? We know that they're on this LinkedIn platform all the time. So, but generally speaking, I would say most of the people that we sell to are not, living on LinkedIn posting content every single day. So we use that as a way of saying, hey, like maybe our emails aren't getting to you, or if they are and you're just not interested, let us know. But I think LinkedIn is, as Jerry said, LinkedIn's one where people will have those walls up pretty quickly too. Similar to like getting a text message on your cell phone, right? Like I use my cell phone for business. So when I get a prospecting text from someone, it doesn't necessarily turn me off. I've become used to that in this world, but I do have a different response to getting a cold text message than I do a cold email. Like I'm a lot more skeptical, and I'm going to scrutinize that text message a lot more. I think the same is true for LinkedIn.
Nice. Great. Well, I want to have some time here to go through some of the awesome questions our audience has put through. Thank you, audience, for putting those in. So we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A really quick. I saw a question come through earlier, and I think it's interesting. They asked, your presentation is mainly covering around new business development, but sort of how do these techniques play out with account managers, with existing clients? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Zach, you're nodding your head. Jerry, whoever would like to take that one first.
For sure. I'll start here because this is the world that I live in, running customer outbound teams. These plays are, largely the same. They work on new business and on existing accounts. Typically, when we think of supporting account managers, we're looking at white space expansion and additional business units and things like that. So oftentimes when we are expanding that relationship, like we are maybe going through a main point of contact that we have, but if they're using us in sales and our MPOC is a director or a VP on the sales side, and we want to talk to the marketing team about our account-based marketing platform, we're going to leverage that relationship, but we really are running sort of a new business prospecting motion to that marketing group. And it's different company by company, right? We're going to lean on that relationship that we already have to understand, hey, what's the smartest way to go about talking to these folks? Like, are you willing to make an intro? That's the lowest hanging fruit. If we're not asking that, we're just foolish. If they're not willing to make an intro, it's like, okay, like, do you have any, like, are there any no-nos here? Anything we should know? And hopefully if we have a good relationship with us, they'll give us some insight there into, what's going to grab the attention of that team or that person. What are they working on right now, right? It's the same types of questions that we've been talking about to get that context and understand how do we be relevant to them rather than just us saying, hey, we're a vendor. We already work with you. We're trying to grow the account. We'd love to show you this platform. Like, let's go to them with, hey, we understand that there might be this initiative or this problem that you have. So these things absolutely apply to, expanding your footprint within current customer accounts as well.
Yeah, Jerry, anything to go off of what Zach just said in terms of account side?
Not too much. Definitely agree. It's very useful in account management. For Reveneer specifically, we are their SDR function for our clients. So we really need to be in tune as an account manager what's happening at that business, because we're really representing them on the front lines. So it's like if somebody new joins the company, as an account manager, do your research on the person, find your relevance, ask to have a conversation with them, understand what's going on with the company. You can use all that to strengthen your relationship with your stakeholders at your client. So definitely it's used on both sides, and you do want to use it in account management, and will build stronger relationships.
Awesome. I saw another question come through that I think is pretty interesting. A couple of people asked a variation of it, but what can be done if a seller isn't getting a reply for what they perceive as personalized, relevant? Someone kind of asked a separate question a little later that touched on when is it the right time to just throw in the towel with these types of efforts.
For sure. And you do want to, let off the gas at some point. It depends. Standard cadence for us is like 10 to 15 calls, 4 to 5 emails, and some LinkedIn touch points. You can use that as a baseline over 30 to 45 days. And then if we don't hear anything, we're going to put them on ice because that person's not responding. And in sales, you do need to use your time effectively. So it's like there is a point to put it off. If you're not getting a response, or you're not getting a pickup after that 10th or so dial, you want to transition to other people in the company typically, or you can try and ask pretty blatantly in an email, like, know you're busy, completely get it, just let me know if you're evaluating this now or not. Like, you can be pretty transparent at a certain point in the cadence, and that's where I have seen a kind of an uptick in reply rate, is when you're replying to the thread and seeing, just being pretty human, just being, hey, let me know, and I'll be hands off. But, my rule of thumb is, 10 to 15 calls, 4 to 5 emails, and a LinkedIn touch point. LinkedIn's weird because they could accept the connect, they could not. You could send an email. That's why I say a LinkedIn touch point. You can be pretty creative there. But if you keep going, and you keep going after people at that account, and you keep going after that domain, some integrity and deliverability could become an issue. There's other issues that come up. So it's not just not getting a response, it's getting in touch even in the future. So that's always my rule of thumb. And there's other people and other accounts to go after. Don't stress over one that you have really good relevance for, because you might have the best in the world. And all these things that we're talking about just increase your chance of getting a reply. It doesn't guarantee anything.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, we ready for the next one? We got lots. We have about 5 minutes. Someone asked a really interesting question. I would love to hear your thoughts. They love how you guys have been talking about relevance, personalization, making sure you stay close to the topic at hand. Have any of these tactics worked on you both as sellers? Like, what have you seen come in that's caught your attention and sort of maintained it? Zach, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah. So I am definitely, I'm involved in a lot of transformation going on at ZoomInfo right now. So my focus day to day is on driving change and really evolving how we do certain things. So I'm very much in like this project type of mode. So I'm much more responsive right now to things that are very in tune with, hey, here's what I think might be going on at ZoomInfo, or here's what I think might be relevant to you right now and what you're working on, versus somebody that found out from social media that I like a certain sports team, or that I live in Michigan and it's cold in the winter, or something like that. Like, I'm much more responsive to, hey, I've been talking to some of your colleagues and here's what I've found out. And I would love to show you how we can help in this initiative you might be working on too. And very recently I've had calls, emails, and LinkedIn's that have been, more geared towards, hey, here is my company and here's what we do. Almost immediately, that's like I don't have time. I just don't. Like, as a sales development professional, I want that good sort of karma, if you will. Like, I would love to be able to respond to every piece of outreach that I get, because I'm also asking my teams to do that every single day. So, like, I get it, but I also have to realize, my time is finite and I have objectives that I'm trying to accomplish. And really, if if what I'm hearing, what I'm being reached out to with, isn't directly in service to one of those objectives, I'm not going to respond, at least right now. I'm not going to spend the time on it. So I'm much more on the relevant side than I am on the personal side.
Jerry, any thoughts on Zach's perspective there?
No, I mean, it definitely makes sense. I mean, pretty short and sweet to what, is going on in the tech space, and, how leveraging, our customer base, our website, our LinkedIn, just stand out and do your research. And, I reply, I'm in sales, 200 SDRs here, so I'll give them the time of day to be like, I'm not interested, or so on. And love getting a cold call. Those are pretty rare nowadays. So it's like, I like getting those and hearing it out. So still, it's like the emails and stuff, it's all great. But at the end of the day, picking up the phone, that separates you just doing that alone. So breaking through the noise, if somebody calls me and they get me on the phone, the conversation's going to happen.
Awesome. Some of the questions rolling in, we only have a couple minutes left. So I kind of wanted to summarize this one. People are wondering, the audience is wondering, how would you convert someone after a conversation? So if they don't say, yeah, I'm willing to book a demo right now in that moment, what is something that they could do post meeting to continue that conversation, continue that relevance, and convert them into a demo?
Yeah, one strategy that I teach my reps is ask what that appropriate next step should be. Like, hey, if it's not a demo right now, that's not necessarily a loss for us. We'd love the opportunity to continue sharing what we're learning from other companies like yours that might be valuable to you. So we keep that door open to continue delivering relevance and, to deploy more personalized messaging down the line, almost like a nurture or a drip sequence of sorts, but it's a little bit more SDR driven and less automated in that sense. So it's really like keeping just the mindset is keeping the door open for us to continue having a conversation. Like, not getting the demo is obviously not the ideal outcome. We want the demo, but it's not a loss because we didn't get the demo. There's still a way for us to continue educating our prospects and sharing value with them from industry peers, things like that. And oftentimes that will lead us to a position down the line. Sometimes it's the long game, but when it's value based and we're truly trying to help that customer, like, we've seen that lead to conversions for us.
Yeah, I like that because it touches on staying relevant and staying top of mind, and playing that long game. Because when they do hit that point where they're like, yes, I'm ready, they'll most likely think of the vendor or the person who's been a little more involved post conversation. Jerry, any other additional tips, any nuggets someone should take from a sales conversation and put it into like a recap email that would really resonate with a prospect?
For sure. And I see a lot of success with the next day sending that thank you email, not day of. It's like just knowing, it's like, hey, I'm still in my thought. It's like, hey, I appreciate the time yesterday. New piece of content came out. It's like Zach said, keep them warm. Send them relevant stuff because other people are not doing that. I think 0 people have done that after a conversation when they're trying to convert. Myself, but I see it work so much on our floor where it's just send them the new content. Hey, cool if I send you a LinkedIn connection request. Love to stay in contact. Like, just going that extra step, because they will reach out to you and be like, hey, I'm ready to talk. And that's the best email to get because it's the easiest way to convert it. So keep them warm, keep dripping content to them in a personal way, not just in a feed from a different alias. Have it come from you, and you'll see those results. It takes longer, but it'll convert.
Great. Well, we are at time. We're at the top of the hour. I wanted to first thank Jerry and Zach for hopping on today and sharing your knowledge and expertise on today's topic. Last quick reminder for our audience, we will be sending out the recording. So you'll have that within 24 hours of today's session if you want to share that out. And thank you for all your questions today. This was a really productive conversation. You guys make these webinars so much more engaging. So thank you for that. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Everyone.
Bye.